Atlantic City, February 1990. The floor of Trump Plaza Hotel and Casino is quiet in the way that only a casino floor can be quiet. Not silent, never silent, but somehow hushed. The usual roar of the slot banks dimmed, the cocktail waitresses moving more slowly than usual, the pit bosses standing a little straighter than they normally would. Near the center of the baccarat pit, a single table has been cordoned off from the surrounding floor. At that table, a compact Japanese man in an immaculate suit is sitting with the stillness of someone who has been in exactly this position many times before and intends to remain in it for a very long time. His name is Akio Kashiwagi. He is 52 years old. He is a real estate developer from Tokyo who is, by some estimates, worth somewhere in the region of $100 million. And he is here in Atlantic City at the personal invitation of a man named Donald Trump to play baccarat at stakes that the casino industry has never quite seen before. The minimum bet at this table has been set at $200,000 per hand. There is no maximum. What happens over the next several days will become one of the most analyzed, debated, and retold stories in the history of high-stakes gambling. It will involve a mathematician, a deliberately engineered strategy to destroy a single man's winning streak, a debt that will never be repaid, and an ending so brutal and so unresolved that it reads not like a gambling story at all, but like the final act of a crime thriller. This is the story of Akio Kashiwagi, the man they called the Warrior. A man who bet millions on the turn of a single card, who sat across the table from Donald Trump's empire and nearly broke it, and who died in a pool of his own blood at his estate outside Tokyo, before anyone ever found out the full truth of what he had done or what had been done to him. It begins, as most great gambling stories do, somewhere very far from the casino floor. Akio Kashiwagi was born in Japan in 1937, 2 years before the Second World War began reshaping the country his parents had always known. He grew up in post-war Japan, a period of extraordinary transformation, of a society rebuilding itself from near total destruction into something new, modern, and relentlessly ambitious. It was a world that rewarded hard work and punished passivity. Akio absorbed both lessons early. He was not from wealth. His family was modest. He was educated, disciplined, and drawn to business the way some people are drawn to art, not as a calculation, but as a calling. Real estate became his field. In the 1960s and 70s, as Tokyo expanded into one of the great metropolitan engines of the global economy, Akio built and bought and sold and developed. He moved fast. He had good instincts about land and timing, two things that, in real estate, are essentially everything. By the 1980s, he was rich, seriously rich. He owned a castle-like estate outside Tokyo, a property so grand that visitors described it as more fortress than home. He drove European cars. He wore suits that were tailored in ways that American businessmen could appreciate, but not quite replicate. He was a man of extreme precision in his personal presentation and extreme appetite in his professional ambitions. He was also, by this point, a gambler of the highest order. No one is entirely certain when Kashiwagi first discovered baccarat. The game is elegant in its simplicity. You bet on either the player or the banker, the cards are drawn according to fixed rules, and the result is determined in seconds. There is no strategy that changes the fundamental mathematics. The house has a slight edge no matter what you do. A sophisticated man, and Kashiwagi was nothing if not sophisticated, understands this. He understands that baccarat, played long enough, will always trend toward the house. He played anyway, not because he did not understand the math, but because the math was not the point. The point was the sensation. The point was sitting at a table where a single hand could swing hundreds of thousands of dollars in either direction, where the stakes were high enough to make every draw of a card feel like a genuine event. Kashiwagi, who dealt in millions in his daily professional life, needed stakes large enough to matter to a man of his means. Standard casino limits were not large enough. He needed the table to be as big as he was. He became known in the tight world of global casino high rollers as the Warrior. It was not an ironic nickname. It reflected something real, a quality of stillness and aggression that observers noted at the table, a willingness to push forward even when the cards were running against him, a refusal to show discomfort that veteran pit bosses found genuinely unnerving. He sat in one position for hours. He barely spoke. He bet enormous sums without visible hesitation. The casinos loved him and feared him in equal measure. They loved him because a man betting hundreds of thousands of dollars per hand is, in the language of the business, a gift. They feared him because Kashiwagi had an uncanny ability to run hot, to hit winning streaks of such magnitude and duration that, for stretches of time, he was genuinely dangerous to a casino's quarterly earnings. He played at the finest properties in Europe and Asia. He played at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. He won enormous sums. He lost enormous sums. His wins, when they came, were spectacular enough that word traveled in the industry the way all extraordinary things travel. Fast, slightly distorted, building with each retelling into something approaching legend. By the late 1980s, Donald Trump had heard the legend. Trump Plaza Hotel and Casino opened in Atlantic City in 1984. By the end of the decade, Trump had expanded his Atlantic City presence to include Trump's castle and was in the process of developing the Taj Mahal, which would open in 1990. He was deeply invested in Atlantic City, deeply leveraged, and deeply aware that the top end of the market, the whale tier, the players who could move the revenue needle in a single weekend, was where the real money was. He wanted Kashiwagi. The courtship was personal. Trump, by his own later account, flew to Japan specifically to meet with Kashiwagi and extend an invitation to play at Trump Plaza. It is not common for casino owners to personally recruit players. It speaks to the scale of what Trump understood Kashiwagi represented. This was not a high roller. This was a category apart from high rollers. The terms of the arrangement were unusual, even by the standards of elite casino negotiation. Kashiwagi would arrive with $12 million. He would play until he either doubled his money, reaching $24 million, or lost everything. No middle ground. No option to walk away at a comfortable stopping point. The session would continue, however long it took, until one of those two outcomes was achieved. It was structurally not a casual gambling trip, it was a duel. Kashiwagi arrived in Atlantic City in the winter of 1990 with his $12 million and his reputation and his stillness, and he sat down at the table at Trump Plaza, and the game began. What followed was immediately extraordinary. The cards ran in Kashiwagi's direction from nearly the first shoe. He won. He won again. He kept winning. The bets were enormous. 200,000, 300,000, sometimes more on a single hand. When the cards are running right and the bets are that size, the stacks build with terrifying speed. Within the first day, Kashiwagi was up significantly. By some accounts, his winnings at various points in the early session approached $6 million above his starting $12 million, putting him close to the $18 million threshold that marked the midpoint between his floor and his ceiling. Trump was watching. There's a quality to the way Donald Trump describes his relationship with gambling that is different from how casino executives typically speak. He talks about it competitively, almost personally, as if the casino's performance against a high roller is a reflection of his own abilities, rather than a statistical inevitability. When Kashiwagi was winning, Trump was losing, and Trump experienced that as something more than a business problem. He called a mathematician. His name was Jess Markham. He was a physicist and gaming analyst who had spent years studying the mathematics of casino games and had consulted for multiple properties. Trump reached out to Markham and asked him a specific question. What is the optimal strategy for a casino facing a player of Kashiwagi's profile, with these specific terms, at this specific game? Markham ran the numbers. His conclusion was precise and counterintuitive. The casino's best strategy was not to slow down, not to change the rules, not to do anything dramatic. The optimal strategy was to keep playing as fast as possible, through as many shoes as possible, for as long as possible. The mathematics of baccarat, Markham explained, meant that over sufficient time, the house edge, even as small as it was in baccarat, would grind Kashiwagi's winnings back to zero and then into loss. The danger was if Kashiwagi won quickly and left. The salvation was volume. Keep the cards moving, keep the game running, let time and math do what time and math always do. Trump implemented the strategy. The game continued. The dealers worked in shifts, so the pace never slackened. The table ran through shoe after shoe, and slowly the mathematics began to do their work. The early winning streak plateaued. Kashiwagi kept betting. The swings continued. Enormous wins, enormous losses, the kind of volatility that in any single session can look like either genius or madness. But across the full arc of the session, which stretched across multiple days, the house edge was grinding steadily in the direction it always grinds. By the time Kashiwagi left Trump Plaza, and he left without reaching either of the agreed endpoints, which would itself become a source of dispute, he was down approximately $10 million. Not quite a full loss of his $12 million, but a devastating result nonetheless. He had not lost everything. He had not doubled his money. He had done something arguably worse. He had played for days, absorbed enormous swings, and walked away in a condition that was neither victory nor clean defeat. The ambiguity of it, the unresolved nature of the session, seemed to suit a man like Kashiwagi in a particular way. He had not been beaten. He had been temporarily disadvantaged. He would be back. And he was. In the months that followed the Trump Plaza session, Kashiwagi continued playing at various properties. His reputation only grew. The scale of his bets was extraordinary enough that casino executives around the world tracked his movements the way meteorologists track a developing weather system, with a mixture of anticipation and unease. He was known to arrive without advance warning, sit down, and play for 48 or 72 hours with minimal breaks. He ate at the table. He napped occasionally in short intervals, and then resumed. He was back at Trump Plaza for a second session. The details of that second session are less well documented than the first, but what is confirmed is this. By the close of 1990, Akio Kashiwagi owed Donald Trump's casino operation approximately $9 million in outstanding gambling debts. Markers that had been signed but not settled. Obligations that, by the standards of casino accounting, were real money owed by a real man with real assets. The debt became a problem. Not an unusual problem in the abstract. Casinos regularly extend credit to high-end players and regularly deal with the complications of collection. But Kashiwagi's case was complicated by scale, by geography, and by something that the people closest to the situation apparently sensed but could not articulate in precise terms. A feeling that the man's circumstances were shifting in ways that were not entirely visible from the outside. The Japanese real estate market, which had inflated through the 1980s to extraordinary valuations, began showing signs of stress in 1990. The asset bubble that had made men like Kashiwagi enormously wealthy on paper was beginning quietly but unmistakably to deflate. Properties that had been worth hundreds of millions of dollars were losing value. Credit was tightening. The world that had produced Kashiwagi's fortune was not the world he was currently operating in. He still owed the casinos. Caesar's Palace was also a creditor. Trump was a creditor. The total figure of his outstanding gambling obligations across multiple properties was somewhere in the range of $10 to $15 million. For a man of Kashiwagi's stated wealth, this should have been manageable, uncomfortable, perhaps embarrassing, but manageable. The question being quietly asked in the casino industry in late 1990 and through 1991 was whether Kashiwagi's wealth was still what everyone believed it to be. He did not answer the question directly. He continued to operate. He traveled. He was seen at his estate, which remained impressive by any measure. He gave no indication of financial distress to anyone who spoke publicly about him during this period. And then came January of 1992. What followed in January of 1992 does not have a clean or satisfying explanation. It has facts, and those facts are stark. Akio Kashiwagi was found dead at his estate outside Tokyo. He was discovered in a room in his home. He had been stabbed, not once, not twice, 100 times. The body bore 100 stab wounds, an act of violence so extreme and so deliberate that investigators immediately understood they were looking at something organized, something planned, something that carried a message intended for an audience beyond the victim himself. He was 54 years old. Japanese police investigated. The investigation was serious, lengthy, and ultimately inconclusive. No suspect was ever formally charged with the murder of Akio Kashiwagi. The case remains officially unsolved. The absence of a conviction does not mean the absence of theories. In the immediate aftermath, attention focused on several possibilities. One involved the Japanese criminal underworld, the Yakuza, whose connections to both the real estate industry and the gambling world in Japan were extensive and well documented. The theory held that Kashiwagi had borrowed money from sources connected to organized crime, that the Japanese real estate crash had compromised his ability to repay, and that the killing was a consequence of those obligations. Another theory, circulated more cautiously, pointed toward his casino debts and the possibility that parties on either side of the Pacific had interests in the resolution of those debts that extended beyond the polite mechanisms of civil law. There is no evidence in the public record linking any American casino or casino figure to Kashiwagi's murder. That must be stated clearly. The investigation was a Japanese matter, conducted by Japanese authorities, and its conclusions, or lack of conclusions, are the conclusions of that process. The theories that circulated in the American press were speculative, and most responsible observers treated them as such. What is not speculative is the financial reality that followed. The $9 million Kashiwagi owed Trump's casino became, effectively, uncollectible. You cannot collect a debt from a dead man. The legal mechanisms for pursuing his estate in a foreign jurisdiction were complicated and ultimately unproductive. Trump later acknowledged the loss, describing it with the kind of frustrated candor that characterized his public statements on business disappointments during that period. He said, in essence, that he had invited the warrior, and the warrior had not paid. The Caesar's Palace debt similarly went largely unresolved, disappearing into the legal fog that surrounds the estates of murder victims when those estates are located in a foreign country and the creditors are corporations in another hemisphere. Kashiwagi's estate outside Tokyo, the fortress, the cars, the extraordinary accumulation of a lifetime of successful real estate development, was subject to claims from multiple directions: his family, his creditors, the processes of Japanese inheritance law. What happened to it in detail is not publicly documented in any comprehensive way. What remained, and what remains still, is the story. The story of a Japanese man who flew to Atlantic City with $12 million and sat across from one of the most famous casinos in America and nearly broke the bank, who was personally recruited by a man who would later become the 45th President of the United States because his appetite for the game was so extraordinary that normal business calculations did not apply, who played baccarat at stakes that made even the most hardened casino executives pause and recalibrate their understanding of what a single human being could put on the line. In the gambling industry, Kashiwagi became a kind of reference point, a measuring stick for what truly extreme play looked like. When industry veterans discuss the upper limits of what is possible in a baccarat pit, his name comes up. Not as a cautionary tale exactly, but as evidence of a category of experience that most people, even most serious gamblers, will never approach. He did things at the table that seemed to exist outside the normal parameters of the game. There is something else about Kashiwagi that tends to get lost in the dramatic mathematics of his sessions. He was not reckless. That word, which gets attached so easily to gambling stories, does not fit him. Reckless implies an absence of awareness. Kashiwagi was acutely aware of what he was doing. He understood baccarat. He understood the house edge. He understood that the session at Trump Plaza was, mathematically, a situation where time worked against him. He had agreed to those terms. He had flown to Atlantic City knowing the structure of the deal. He was not reckless. He was something more interesting than reckless. He was a man of enormous means and appetite who had found in baccarat the only arena that matched the scale of the life he had built. Where other men his age and wealth would have been playing golf or funding philanthropies or attending charity dinners, Kashiwagi was sitting at a table with $200,000 on a single hand, in a state of complete stillness, watching the cards come. It is impossible, looking at his story from a distance of more than 30 years, to know what he wanted from those sessions beyond the sessions themselves. Was it the money? He had money. Was it the thrill? Perhaps, but men who describe Kashiwagi say the word thrill does not quite fit. He was too still for thrill, too composed. Was it something simpler and harder to name? The feeling of consequence, of mattering in a room, of being the center of gravity around which an entire casino's attention orbited. That, perhaps, is closer. He was the warrior, and the warrior needed a battle that was worthy of him. Whether he found it, or whether the battle ultimately consumed him through channels that had nothing to do with the cards themselves, is a question that the unsolved facts of January 1992 do not answer. The case file in Japan sits in whatever archive holds unsolved homicides. The casino markers, long since written off as bad debt, exist somewhere in the accounting records of properties that have changed names and ownership multiple times since 1990. The estate outside Tokyo has passed through whatever legal processes attend a murdered man's fortune. And the table at Trump Plaza, where Akio Kashiwagi sat for days with $12 million and nearly doubled it before the mathematics caught him, that table no longer exists in the same form. Trump Plaza itself closed in 2014, unable to survive the competitive pressures that had reshaped Atlantic City in the years since its glory era. The building stood empty for years and was eventually demolished in 2021. The implosion was carried live on local television. The building came down in a matter of seconds, a structure that had taken years to build and that had witnessed, among many other things, one of the most extraordinary gambling sessions in American history. Now it is a cleared lot facing the Atlantic. Nothing in the world of high-stakes gambling stays standing forever. The casinos understand this. The whales understand this. The mathematics understand this most of all. Akio Kashiwagi bet $14 million on the turn of a kid card and very nearly won. He left a debt of $9 million that was never paid and a murder that was never solved. He left a nickname, the Warrior, that still circulates in the industry as shorthand for a particular kind of player. Someone so large, so deliberate, so immune to the social pressures that govern normal gambling behavior, that the usual tools of casino management simply do not apply. The cards do not know your name. They do not know your reputation. They do not know that you flew from Tokyo on a private plane, or that you are worth $100 million, or that an entire casino has reorganized its staffing to accommodate your presence. The cards come out the same way they always come out, one at a time, indifferent to everything. The warrior knew this. He knew it and played anyway. That, in the end, is the only fact about Akio Kashiwagi that cannot be disputed, sealed, lost, or murdered. He played anyway.